go ahead and stand, and let's worship again.
Jesus. am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. Yes, I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. And you are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. Oh, I am who you say I am. And who the Son sets free, oh, is free. Yes, I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. Sing that again. And in my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am.
Father, we see this prayer. Father, we just thank you for that truth. No matter what we're going through, what we've been through, as you call us child, we can call you Father. Lord, I pray for this last session, God, that you would just be in this moment. That you would speak to us. That you would speak through Nick. Lord, that you would just show us your power. Lord, we love you. To you be the glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Josh, the worship team. Well, that was fun. I said we weren't going to have a whole lot of fun today, but that was fun. So, yeah, it's always great to sing. Our worship team does such a great job. Well, if you just happened to join us, either by live stream or just by coming in, my name's Travis Hart. I'm the lead pastor here at the Lakes Church. You're not going to hear much from me today. I knew someone was going to say it. Thank you, Alan. You know, if a true friend can't keep you humble, they're just not a true friend. I am very honored to get to introduce our guest speaker. He taught me a lot of scripture. He taught me other things too, like the kicking chicken and all those other things. Y'all don't know this, but Nick is a brilliant musician. He's quite the pianist. And one thing he used to do when he was my youth pastor is get one of us youth to come up and puppet his Kermit the Frog, and then he would sing songs as Kermit. So ask him about that later. Don't worry, he's not going to do that right now. Nick's going to come back up and talk to us, continuing about this suicide epidemic. Would y'all welcome Nick Watts to the stage?
Oh, Travis. Oh, I'll never forget Travis. Now, you know, I could tell you stories, but really, and it's kind of a letdown for all who may be looking for something you can really hold over his head. Travis was a great kid. I don't know what happened. But as a youth pastor, you know, oh my goodness. Oh, wow. It's like in some countries, you know, you have to serve in the military 2 or 3 years. Everyone in ministry should be required to serve in youth ministry for 2 or 3 years. It is hard work because everything's relational. And so, you know, I've told them before, you can call me anytime, day or night, and they have done that. I'll never forget one girl, when I was in Grand Prairie, 1:30 in the morning, phone rings. Of course, that's back when you just had a landline, you know. I answered the phone. Hey, and she told me her name. I went, everything okay? Yeah, you just told us to call you. I just want to see how you were. I'm asleep. But thanks for calling. Oh, man. But Travis was one of those kids, you know, that as a youth pastor, you think, man, I wish I could have had 100 of those types of folks. And he really was. And that's one of the reasons I was so thrilled about coming when he invited me to come. Oh, and that Kermit the Frog, I don't know how that started, but I always have to wait until I have a frog in my throat before I can do that little imitation. That's horrible, I know it. Well, thank you so much. I whispered to Travis, I said, man, it looks like we have just as many people here this afternoon as we did this morning, because I thought, well, with the weather and people get busy, it's a Saturday, and you could be a dozen different places, but thank you so much for coming. As I told you this morning, this afternoon will all be practical. How we can help those who are suicidal, those who have lost a loved one to suicide, and if you're here today and you have lost a loved one to suicide, I'm just going to offer some suggestions on how to give you hope that you will make it. In fact, after Jordan died, I'll never forget it. You know, the hordes of people came in through our door, and of course everybody was grieving with us and holding us, and of course I was despondent, absolutely despondent. But then every now and then someone would walk through that door who had lost a child, or someone who had lost a loved one to suicide. And I remember fixing on them and having this cognitive dissonance, this argument in my mind that this is the end of my life, but somehow they're still alive. And they seem to be living life again. I can't comprehend, at that point, I'm saying to myself, I can't comprehend that. But maybe I will live again. And so hopefully if you have followed in my footsteps in years past or in months past, you can look at me almost 6 years removed and just know that you will live again. You'll never be the same, but you will live again. I remember it was, let's see, Jordan died in March. I laughed again in October. I was in a state of shock for 8 months. So those stages of grief, they're all over the place. And the reason I know it was 8 months is because one morning in January, and I promise, I always think I'm not going to get emotional, but there's no way around it. I got up one morning the following January of 2014. Something was different, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it, what was different. And then a few minutes later, I realized it. I woke up not trying to undo Jordan's death. So for 8 months, for every waking moment, I was somehow trying to undo everything, to go back in time to it's maddening and it is exhausting. I had a friend of mine call me not long after my son took his life. His father had taken his life. And he said, Nick, you've got to try to get your rest. He said, this kind of grief is exhausting. And I found I couldn't make it a single day at the office. I'd have to go find a Sunday school room or something and just lie down for a little bit. So let's get into this, shall we? In regard to that person who is suicidal, in immediate risk of harming themselves or death, let me give you some practical counsel in general, and then we'll get specific. Number one, simply be present. What do I mean by that? When Macy, my youngest daughter, was in high school, I came home. She was very excited about something that day had happened great at school. And she was next to my wife, Michelle, and here I come, and Michelle says, Macy, tell Dad. And so I walk up, and Macy started talking. The next thing I hear is my wife say, Macy, just stop. Your dad's not listening. I was on my phone checking an email. I was there, but I wasn't present. And so I tell teenagers, man, put your phone down and take a good look around you. See if there's something you're missing. Take inventory. Dads, we're the worst. Moms are far more attentive than us, right? Dads, every now and then, just stop. Turn off the basketball tournament. Turn off college football or whatever your thing is, and just sit down with your family members. Look at them closely. Be present and make sure they know that you're always going to be there for them. Second, be willing. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we commonly say, if you need anything, just let me know. And again, we mean that. I don't mean to insult anyone. We say that genuinely. In this context, that would be equal to walking by the deep end of a swimming pool. Someone who can't swim is drowning. You look at them and you say, hey, if you need anything, just let me know. They're drowning. Here's a better response. I can see you're struggling. I'm here for you. Can we get through this together? Now, there's two huge axioms in that a person who is on the proverbial cliff need to know because they can't see it. Number one, I can see you're hurting. They've lost all capacity to be able to articulate that they're hurting. And as I mentioned earlier today, they don't want you to know they're hurting if they've already planned their exit from planet Earth. But it also helps them to know you're not alone, and that is huge. In fact, let me read this to you. I was calling this up while Travis was up here. Weekend of Hope. What a perfect title to this weekend. Romans 15:13, Paul said, may the God of hope fill you with all joy. Now, these are hurting people he's writing to. Severe persecution, some unto death. With all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. So when we're done here in about 45 minutes, I hope that once again you will be able to see that there is hope and that there is help. Because of the cross and the empty tomb, everything has changed. So I can see you're struggling. I'm not going anywhere. Oh, I'm fine. No, you're not. Can we get through this together? The key to managing grief, let me make sure. Got it. The key to managing grief, mental illness, and suicidal thoughts is communication. Oftentimes, and this is actually from the Houston Chronicle, oftentimes those who are struggling tend to isolate instead of communicate. We've talked about that this morning. Through it all, communication is key to breaking out of the cycle of hopelessness and connecting to a support system. Sometimes the person at risk is at a place where they can't communicate. And it's then we must be their voice. We can't be their voice unless we're paying attention, right? And by the way, no guilt here. If you were someone's friend and they took their life, it's all right. You didn't do anything wrong. You cannot protect a person from themselves. So this is for us just to learn as we go through life now. There's no guilt or shame here. It's important you understand that. So we must be their voice. The Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, the ASSIST model, you can Google that, is one of the workshops that I attended. And this is the specific, these are the specific things that they offered that we can say to someone who is on the cliff, the proverbial cliff. Number one, are you considering taking your life? Now, this seems to be a dumb question, right? It is not, because chances are they have never said that out loud. They have romanticized it. I'm going to help those around me. I'm no longer going to be a burden. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to end the pain. And so you sit there non-condemning. I mean as gentle as holding a newborn baby. You are non-judgmental. You're not saying, are you considering taking your life? You're not heaping any shame or guilt on them, right? Are you considering taking your life? They may say, I don't know. You say, I'm not satisfied with that. I'm not leaving until you tell me. Remember, we're going to get through this together. The man on the video earlier, remember on the Golden Gate Bridge? He said, I thought to myself, no one cared. He said the reality was everybody cared. But when your brain is broken, right? Are you considering taking your life? If they say yes, you go to the next question. Why do you want to die? This is absolutely huge. Here's why. Because while they're talking about why they want to die, you're listening for reasons why they want to live. So their psyche has already been, I think about the paddles they put on a dying body, clear. And so they've already had that kind of in their brain as they've actually said out loud, yes, I'm considering killing myself. And then you gently, non-judgmentally, why do you want to die? You're validating that their pain is so great that they think taking their life would be a better option. And she's saying, please tell me. It is a narrative, folks. Rather than just hand out, hey, here's what you need to do, 1, 2, 3, 4, you are acknowledging to them that you are stepping inside of their story. Now listen, they've been isolated. And so as you gently and carefully step inside, they're beginning to trust you, right? Because they haven't trusted in a while. So for instance, let's say, they say, I can't do this any longer to my family. You know what that tells me? They love their family. So many people have bullied me. You know what it tells me? They care about what others think about them. We can help these things. There's help and hope for those issues. So we're listening as they're talking, as they're communicating. We're not interrupting them when they're done because we want them to talk. Oh, I wish I'd known this. Oh. Number 3. So after they share, we say, what I'm hearing you say is that that part of you wants to die. But I'm also hearing you say, part of you wants to live. Now that is a huge explosion of truth. You're acknowledging, you're validating them. Part of you wants to end it. But I'm also hearing that part of you doesn't. Could I be right? See how gentle that is? Could I be right? So we need to protect the part of you that wants to live. There is, well, I used to call it a fine line between taking someone to the ER and not. Today, for obvious reasons, as I said this morning, I counsel parents, grandparents, siblings. Michelle and I have counseled every conceivable relationship. Friends, to always err on the side of caution. And we'll talk about more of that in a little while. But if they have a plan, if you see that these steps have been taken, yeah, it's a good idea to take them somewhere where they will be protected from themselves. I want to show you another video clip. Now, when I first chose this clip, I didn't really realize the significance of the man who is the star. It's Robin Williams. You know that he took his own life. Back in 1998, a motion picture came out called Patch Adams. Now, my wife bought me the book on which that movie was based. It's called Gesundheit. Hunter Patch Adams, Patch being a nickname. Creative, probably a propensity for depression, that sort of thing. And so he actually spent Halloween in a psychiatric ward. And in the beginning of the movie, if you saw the movie, he begins in a psychiatric ward. And in the day room, now I totally get it now. I completely get it. You go to the day room, and that's where you watch television, and you sit in the furniture that's all bolted to the floor, and you do crafts. When I got home from the psych ward after those 10 days, somehow I still had my craft with me. It's colored sand and glue. All right? It was very pretty. Of course, when I got home, I threw it in the trash. My wife got it back out. We've kept it. And so, yes, I laugh at all of this now. And you know what, by the way? 95% of the other people in that psych ward were detoxing. It would just be like you and me sitting and talking. Just people hurting and broken who just needed to be in a place where they wouldn't hurt themselves. There's so much pain in this world. So back to the clip. They're in the day room, and there is a cranky older guy who seems crazy. His name is Arthur. And he keeps walking around while people are playing ping pong or watching television or whatever, and he keeps throwing his fingers up in the front of their face. If you saw it, you remember, and he says, "How many fingers do you see? How many fingers do you see?" And everyone would say, "There's 4 fingers, Arthur." "No, no." And they just kind of laugh him off and say he's crazy, crazy. So one night, Patch Adams, Robin Williams, decides he's got to have the answer to that question. Let me start it here. Did I miss it? There we go. Could you start it for me? Wonderful. Thank you.
May I come in?
If you bend your medial and collateral ligaments, place one talus in front of another, I don't see where you'd have a problem. Of course, if there were a news story covering this event, the headline might read, "Small brain enters room."
Fingers. What's the answer?
Oh, you're another one of those bright young fellows who always know the right answer, huh? Welcome to real life. How many do you see?
There are 4 fingers, Arthur.
No. Look at me. You're focusing on the problem. If you focus on the problem, you can't see the solution. Never focus on the problem. Look at me. How many do you see? Yeah. Look beyond the fingers. How many do you see?
Eight.
8. 8. Yes. 8's a good answer. Yes. See what no one else sees. See what everyone else chooses not to see. Out of fear, conformity, and laziness. See the whole world anew each day. Now, the truth is, you're well on the way. You didn't see something here besides a crazy, bitter old man. You wouldn't have come in the first place.
What do you see when you look at me, Arthur?
You fixed my cup. I'll see you around. Patch.
I love that clip. Here's why. A person who is severely depressed and considering taking their life can only see this. They can see despair, hopelessness, discouragement, depression. That's all they can see. And so you and I get to come along aside them, beside them, and carry them and help them see beyond the fingers, that there's hope, that there's help, that there's Christ, that we're not going anywhere, and that we're here to help them see beyond the pain. And until they do, we've got them, right? We continue on to others who we help see beyond the fingers. This is a 17th century painting of the Good Samaritan. There are those who are along the road who are in desperate need of our help. I had a lady call me one time, and she asked me, she said, "My child has a friend who's suicidal. What do I tell my child?" You tell your child to tell another adult, their parents, immediately. Your friend may at first be very upset, you tell the child, even angry with you for telling an adult. Let them be angry. You may be well saving their life and saving their family from unspeakable grief. You have everything to gain and nothing to lose. So if you're in that context, I just had this counseling session a month ago with another mom from another state. She said, do I actually just bring it up? I said, I tell you what, don't bring it up, and a week from now, how about that girl's dead that we're talking about? You have everything to gain and nothing to lose. What do families need after the suicide of a loved one? What do they not need? Well, to effectively help those, typo there, who have lost a loved one to suicide, you must first understand the mind of those who've lost a loved one to suicide. Psychologists call grief associated with the loss of a loved one to suicide complicated grief because it is all over the map. I saw this once, and it's perfectly accurate. The death of a child is like losing your breath and never catching it again. It's a forever panic attack, feeling your heart dying as your soul is screaming for them. And no matter what you try to do, you continue to lose your mind. This was about 2 weeks after Jordan took his life. I have no idea who took this picture. Sometimes I think God snapped it and just put it in my phone. I don't know who would have taken that picture. And there were several times along the way that people came by that I'd never met, and I would look at them. I'd get up in their eyes and say, are you an angel? So I'm holding my daughter Macy here. And just staring. The grief is numbing. You're paralyzed. You're crippled. And so a picture does say 1,000 words. These parents and siblings of those who have taken their life, there are questions you're asking that will never, ever be answered. I saw this the other day. It was fantastic. It's exhausting to fight a war inside your head every single day. Again, this is insight into the mind of someone who has lost a loved one to suicide. C.S. Lewis, this is the first book I read after Jordan died, his book, A Grief Observed. It's C.S. Lewis, the former atheist, one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century, obviously the author of the Chronicles of Narnia. He waited all that time to get married, finally found the right person, and then she almost immediately, died of cancer. And his book, A Grief Observed, unloads on God. But then at the end, just like in many of the Psalms, the psalmists do the exact same thing. He comes back around and has sort of a resolution. But he says here, no one ever told me that grief felt so much like fear. At other times, it feels like being concussed. There's a sort of invisible blanket between the world and me. I find it hard to take in what anyone says, or perhaps hard to want to take it in. It is so uninteresting. Yet, I want the others to be around me. I dread the moments when the house is empty. Oh, that's 100% true. My default was isolation, withdrawal. I didn't want to be around anybody. I work at a church. I didn't want to go to church, but when I would finally muster the courage, or someone would help me muster the courage, and I got around those people who loved me, I never wanted to leave. I wanted to live there. A Houston attorney whose son took his life wrote this. He said, the path of grief is an interesting one. It twists and turns in unexpected ways, and all you can do is meet what comes your way each day. To do otherwise leads to pain and fear and despair, I know. I've met it head on, and I've also turned and run. He concludes, and when I reached my end, when I had nothing left, God heard my cry. And although I had seemingly forgotten him, he took me in his arms and held me close. Then he sent his earthly angels to touch my heart and gave me the strength to take one more step to face a new sunrise and choose again to walk into the darkness, taking the short path towards tomorrow's sunrise. He sent his earthly angels to help me take one more step. I have a dear friend who lives in Denver, Colorado. And I remember for, maybe 3 weeks, every day he texted me one phrase, just one step. Just one step. So how do we do that for folks who have lost a loved one? Number one, keep your cliches to yourself. God has another angel in heaven. God knows best. This was God's will. You know what? If that's what you have, just don't say anything at all. Don't try and offer an explanation for an event for which there is no explanation. Like I said, suicide prompts complicated grief. So don't feel like you have to sit down and begin to explain why this happened. There is no explanation. The only one we could ask why it happened is gone. And so this does nothing but make things worse for that person who is already themselves at their wits' end. These statistics are those who have lost a loved one to suicide are 6 times more likely to take their own lives. Early on, a grieving family or individual doesn't need advice, just your presence will do. There is a thing I call the ministry of presence. You read the book of Job. Chapters 1 and 2 is the behind the curtain, this wager, this cosmic wager going on between God and Satan. You know the story. If you don't, go back and read those 2 chapters, because Job is righteous on earth, and Satan says, oh, well, sure he's righteous. Sure he loves you because you've got this hedge of protection around him. And God says, I've removed the hedge. Have your way. Just don't kill him. And so Job lost everything. Listen, he had buried 10 children. His friends show up. And for 7 days, all they did was sit there. That's all they did. On day 8, they started talking, and that's when everything went downhill. And so this ministry of presence, you may think, what good am I doing? I promise you, I'm telling you from experience, you are doing so much good, because when I'm ready to talk, I'll start talking. You may have been sitting there an hour, and then all of a sudden, I start just saying, what could I have done? And you just put your arm around me. Sometimes we dads, we want to fix everything, right? Sometimes we just need to hurt with them. I'll get back to that in a minute. Resist making their grief about you. Here's what I mean about that. I had several friends do this, and it was absolutely innocent on their part. They hadn't lost anyone to suicide. But as they'd say, hey, Nick, I want to spend some time. I want to take you for coffee. Okay. And I would begin talking, and every time they would go into how their father died, how their mother died, how their brother died. And I've now checked out. Now this is about you. This is something that was sad, especially when their parents have died of natural causes. Pardon me, but I don't care. I can't even see right now. You can't possibly comprehend how close I am to insanity. Let's talk about your parent who passed away next year. Could we do that? So, let them grieve. Let them talk. The family or individual must be given as much time as necessary to process their grief. Thank God Almighty that no one ever came up to me and said, are you not over it yet? Because I promise you this, I would not have responded in a Christ-like way. The right hand of fellowship would have met their mouth really quickly. I'm telling you, it would have. There is no time limit, because we all grieve differently, uniquely. Me, my wife, my daughter Kelsey, my daughter Macy have all traveled this road differently. And so, as we'll get into in just a little bit, we have to be patient with one another. Yes, there are times when we can, unknowingly to us, get trapped in that abyss of self-loathing. My wife, I call this the Adrian to Rocky talks. You remember all the Rocky movies? And about midway through, Rocky says, I can't do it, I can't do it. And Adrian gets in his face, or you know that? Well, my wife has given me a number of those, and man, she shucks the corn, all right? And I remember one time she got in my face and she said, you are choosing to live in despair. Well, number one, she had earned that right. Number two, she was right. And so, yes, there are times when it is time for them to at least take another step. But you make sure that you've earned that right to be that person, to tell them. Never put a self-righteous time limit on someone else's grief. The little everyday tasks become mountains we simply can't climb right now, and we need you to carry us. Let me set up this clip. This may be the last clip. Lord of the Rings fans, this is the last of the trilogy. It is Return of the King, and it is toward the end of the movie. Samwise, of course, is accompanying young Frodo. Frodo is the only one who can bear the ring, right? Frodo is now climbing up Mount Doom. He is so close to throwing the ring into the lava so that it's destroyed forever. But he can't make it. He falls, and he's about to succumb to the evil and the wickedness and the despair and hopelessness. Samwise, watch. Samwise is us to that person who can't carry the load on their own. You want to go ahead and start that for me, brother? Thank you.
I can see him with my waking eyes.
Then let us be rid of it. Once and for all. Come on, Mr. Frodo. I can't carry it for you. But I can carry you. Come on!
I get so emotional when I watch that small clip because I know people, I could name them right now, who have carried me like that and who have borne my weight and my grief. They can't carry the grief, but they can carry me, and they have. And so we are here to carry one another, right? We sure are. So, last thing. Oh, man. These talks are exhausting. You're here today and you've lost a loved one to suicide. What do you do? How do you heal? One of the rewarding things about this is because I'm able to use a couple of Jordan's paintings. This is one. I don't know if you can see it real clearly. He was tasked one time in high school by my pastor at my church of doing weekly paintings. Thank you, sir. Wow, that's awesome. Weekly paintings as the pastor was going through the Beatitudes, and he and I would have conversations each week. I mean, how do you draw a picture that says, blessed are the pure in spirit, blessed are the meek, so forth and so on. And so, as we talked about blessed are the merciful, we both talked about God's mercy and how despite our depravity and our undeserving nature, Christ from the cross reached down and took us. And so if you're here today and you're in that place of unspeakable pain, you don't have to worry about your grip on Christ. He's got his grip on you, and it's never loosening. Never. We have this painting hanging up in our room, in our house. If you're that person, number one, embrace your grief. There's no way around it. One must go through it. Grieving is actually a vital part of the entire healing process. I did a funeral for a former youth. You would know him if we talked about it. This was, I don't know, almost 2 years ago, I think. And it was tragic. His father has never dealt with it. Very angry, and rightfully so. I get that. Been through the rage, been through it all. Shook my hand. I've used more profanity in prayer than I ever have normally. But I found God could handle it. He can handle it. So, embrace your grief. Men, there's nothing strong about avoiding the pain. In fact, Paul said, when I am weak, then I am strong. And I'm going to tell you something. Hey, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm going to tell you something. Thank you so much. Forgot what I was going to say. Let's go on. I'll tell you in a minute. Joe Luce, the Houston attorney that I mentioned a while ago and quoted, he said, as hard as I tried, I could not outrun the great darkness. I could not put it in a box and place it on a shelf in the back of my mind. As I rounded each corner, it was there to greet me. I know what I was going to say. The professional counselor told me, he said, Nick, it's not a matter of if the grief will emerge. It's a matter of when. You can deal with it now, or you can let it eat you alive from the inside out and then be forced to deal with it later. In the meantime, if you choose option B, you will systematically and methodically destroy everyone who loves you. Your spouse, your kids. Embrace your grief so you can begin healing. Rediscover your true north, my friends. As I told you, atheism failed me. He gave me nowhere to put my rage and gave me no hope. David wrote, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and he saves those who are crushed in spirit. About Jesus, 7 centuries prior to his birth, Isaiah the prophet wrote, he was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. And so this is the one who embraces us. This is the one that we take our pain to. He gets it. In that picture earlier that had me and my daughter just holding one another, I didn't point it out, but in the background you could see one of the 8 copy paper, 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper that we had run off Bible verses on. I bet we had 50 of those. We hung them to every cabinet door, every door jamb, every mirror. It was all over the house. I got a tattoo when I was 52, something like that. Swore I would never, ever, ever do that. Not because I'm against tattoos. It's just that now they're so common, you don't get a tattoo really to be unique. It's kind of like everybody has one. So I didn't want one. But my son had one right here just like this. His in Hebrew said, die to self. And he would use Galatians 2:20 when he would share his faith. I have been crucified with Christ, therefore I no longer live, but Christ lives. And so after he died, my daughters taught me into it. And so when I went to my older daughter's graduation in Nashville, she said, I'll take you to my tattoo artist. Okay, I feel safe now. And so I go there. And, of course, those guys, they're tatted everywhere. They're bald, but their heads covered, everywhere covered. I laid down. Well, the 23rd Psalm had become very dear to me. I know it's very familiar, but sometimes when I was curled up in the fetal position on the floor, screaming my head off, all I could say was, the Lord is my shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. That's all I could say. And so in Hebrew, this says, the Lord is my shepherd. Since that day, and by the way, I cried when I got this. Not out of emotion. It hurt. That's a lot of ink right there. And of course, this big tough guy, and I'm trying not, but I'm squeezing my wife's hand so much, and she's going, please let go of my hand. But since that time, one time I went to the grocery store, and I got in line, and the boy who was checking everybody out, I looked up, he looked, never seen him before, looked exactly like my son. I lost it. I immediately went out to the car and started screaming. I couldn't think of a single Bible verse. Been in full-time ministry for 36 years. I looked at my arm and started saying, the Lord is my shepherd. Without fail, I'm not being melodramatic. I'm not exaggerating. Every single time, the Word of God has slowed my heart and helped me to calm down. Every time. Again, from Jordan, we have he painted this when he was about 9. He just came in one day. I'll never forget it. I was in the kitchen. And he said, Dad, I painted this for you because I was hurting at the time. We have it framed and hanging in our house, and we call it When We Hurt, God Hurts. Number 3, surround yourself with people who love you and allow them to love you. Lori Clancy is a licensed professional counselor. She said she's author of Through the Valley, Surviving a Loved One's Suicide. She said if you have isolated yourself or pushed others away from you, it may be time to reconnect. Number 4, when ready, get counseling, professional help. Again, Clancy says you may be at the point where your grief, pain, or isolation is physically affecting your body and brain. Additional complications arise if you were the one who found your loved one. Of course, I'm in that category. I would encourage you, please, when you're ready. We were 4 or 5 months removed when we were first able to listen to counseling. And so when you can, please get help. Counseling is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of real strength. And these people have trained all their lives for that very purpose of helping people like you and me who are broken and need help. Number 5, talk about your grief. Write, blog about it. A year or so after Jordan died, it actually was a college-age girl. She said, you know what, you should start blogging. So I did. And most of my blogs, except for that one that went viral, I don't know that anyone reads. But for me, it's therapeutic. And so that it may be therapeutic for you, but don't be afraid. Some people come up, well, they still do this. I'm so sorry, I don't want to bring up your son. Listen, please do. There's not a moment of any day we're not already thinking about him. Please, we enjoy talking about him. So this is therapeutic. Consider, when able to do so, helping others who've come behind you. Rick Warren said this: other people are going to find healing in your wounds. Remember when I mentioned those people who had walked my path, but they're down the road, and I'm able to say, okay, you made it. Okay, somehow I think I can make it. If you made it, are you telling me there's life after this? Your greatest life messages and your most effective ministry will come out of your deepest hurts. You know, I heard a preacher say one time, people don't relate with our strengths. If I got up here to you and said, hey, man, I'm in the best shape I've ever been in, clearly that's not the case. Just won the lottery, and I'm great, have no problems. No one would have come back to session 2. Who cares, all right? But when you open up and you're transparent and you let people know, look, I'm as beat up as you, man, you have their ear. Especially if you've been able to survive that and now you're living. So this last thing, if married, guard your marriage. Here's what happened on the day Jordan died. By this time, 911 has been called, the paramedics, EMTs, the police, everybody's there, hundreds of people. Oh, this is material I've never shared before in a session. And so some of these things I'm having to remember for the first time in a while. Someone had called my wife. She's a school teacher. They used my phone. They said, Michelle, you need to get home immediately. What's happened? Please just come home. Of course, you know how that terrifies you. She thought something happened to me because they were using my phone. She pulled up. She has her window down, and she can't see me because I'm on the ground. People are everywhere. And someone said, there's Michelle. I raise up. She hears her window down. She says, what happened? And I screamed, Jordan is dead. She jumps out of her car and runs to me and gets on the ground, and she holds my face in her hands, and she says, you and I are going to make it. Because she already knew this statistic that, as I'll show you in this quote by Frank Page, he lost his daughter Melissa to suicide. He said, marriages are frequently the next in line to die after suicide claimed its initial victim. It's a secondary collateral target of nearly every suicide. Know that Expect that and realize that your marriage is now more dependent than ever on your willingness to forgive, to avoid blame and argument, and to allow one another to be yourselves, to grieve uniquely, particularly through those first few months and years when emotions are still so painful to the touch. Oh, sorry. I hadn't traveled back to that in a while. So, also resources. Find stories of others who've gone before you and survived. I mentioned Lori Clancy, it's Through the Valley, Surviving the Loss of a Loved One Suicide. Frank Page, Melissa, C.S. Lewis, A Grief Observed. William Young, The Shack. Now, be easy on me here. There's been much ugly debate about William Young's book, The Shack. I agree that theologically he takes some missteps. However, I was asked to read this in my graduate studies in Christian apologetics, and so I had no choice. I had not read it before. This was in 2014, so a year and a half after Jordan died. I read the book twice, and God used that story to help me forgive myself and to forgive God. In fact, the protagonist in the story, he lost a daughter. She was murdered in the story. It's a fictitious story, but his journey, he talks about the great darkness. And that's all I'll say is it just helped me tremendously in that regard. And then this one, as we finish this up. This is by Dr. Alan Wolfelt. It's Healing a Parent's Grieving Heart, 100 Practical Ideas After Your Child Dies, from compassionate advice and simple activities that have helped thousands of grieving parents learn to live again. Again, even if you lost a brother or a parent, all of these things would translate to your particular grief. So, how do we finish up? Well, at the end of every talk I do in public schools, I always finish by saying this. If it were May 12th, 2013, one day before Jordan took his life, and he were sitting next to you, listening to a speaker talk on this topic, what would I want that speaker to say? I attended that workshop I mentioned this morning at Texas Tech University Health Science Centers on suicide. Christian Anderson was the first guest speaker that day. She was in a wheelchair. Both legs had been amputated. Sweet, precious as could be. After a traumatic event in her town up in the upper Midwest, she decided that she was going to take her life. She went to the train tracks outside her town and laid down. A few minutes later, 33 cars traveling at 55 miles an hour ran over her. She was thrown some 30 feet away from the train tracks, and she lived. God just wanted her to be alive. And so, bless her heart, she has turned her entire existence into helping others who are on that proverbial cliff. So, after she was done, she said, "Are there any questions?" Man, my hand shot up. I was on the front row. "Yes, ma'am." Or she said, "Yes, sir." And I said, "My son took his life. He was 19. I said, "I can't ask him what he needed to hear the day before he died, but I can ask you." And so she said this: if you're out there today and you've been on that edge, never forget you are loved. You matter. Blemishes, flaws, dysfunctions, everything. Your loss would be devastating. The fact is, everybody cares. You're here for a reason. Talk, keep talking. There is hope and there is help, regardless of what your broken brain may be telling you. And again, I include this in all my talks in public schools. If that applies to you, when we're done, run, don't walk to the nearest counselor, parent, loved one, trusted friend, or teacher. This is my son. You see his tattoo there on his left forearm. I end by reminding you of the hope that we have in the risen Christ. It is because of the cross and the empty tomb that we can take another step, right? It is because of the cross and the empty tomb that we can live today and again. It's because of the cross and the empty tomb that I'm able to stand up here at all and to share these things with you. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. My counselor told me, as I told him, we still live in the same house where Jordan took his life. It didn't make sense to move. And I said, that corner where I found him, I can't. He said, Nick, place a cross in that corner. Place a cross, you true north. And it'll always remind you of where Jordan is. He is free of pain. He is free of depression. He's more alive now than he's ever been. And when he breathed that last breath, when your loved one breathed that last breath, I like to think it looked something just like this when he entered heaven. And Christ said, I've got you. I've got you. And because heaven is eternal, and eternal is has to do not with time, but existence. They're not waiting on us. They're not sad. When we get there, it'll be as though no time passed because no time exists there. One day, man. One day. I have blogs related to suicide on my blog there. That's a suicide hotline. My psychiatrist, last story, asked me one time, she said, and she's an awesome lady, I mean awesome. And I told her, you know, doctor, I've been starting to do these talks. People keep asking me to come talk. And she looked at me, she said, why would you put yourself through that kind of torture? Fair question. Here's why. My very first talk, it was in January of 2015. I was at a high school there in the Lubbock area, and I was a mess. I mean, I was a mess at times today. I had no PowerPoint. I got up there with these rambling notes. It had not been long enough since Jordan died. Later that year, I would go into the psych ward. It was an absolute, in hindsight, I felt so sorry for those kids sitting out there thinking, this guy's, Anyway, you kind of get the picture. Well, after that day, I went home, went back to the office. The next day, I got this email. It was from a school counselor at one of the high schools there in Lubbock. She said, Nick, you need to know that we had a young man come in this morning, Thursday morning, and tell us that he, last night, he tried to kill himself, and he swallowed an entire bottle of pills. She said, then he told us, I made myself throw up. And they said, what caused you to do that? And he said, I kept thinking about that man who lost his son. That's why I put myself through this torture. I love you so much. Thank you for coming.
Amen. You guys can remain standing. We're, I know this isn't normal what we call church service, but before we just conclude, I want to remind you a couple things. Number one, Nick will be preaching at our service tomorrow. That's right. Woohoo. He's even threatened that he might get on the piano. He hasn't decided that yet, but if in case he doesn't, just go check out his YouTube page. You can see all the different stuff he throws out on there. But you might have some people request Great Balls of Fire. I don't know. But on a more serious note, man, what Nick was sharing just reminded me of the hope we have with Jesus. We've shared a lot in these breakout sessions. Some of us have had to go and experience some grief we don't really enjoy talking about because we want to offer hope to others. I don't know where you're at. If you would like to come down and just pray, maybe you just want to cry. Maybe you haven't ever heard the gospel presented the way Nick just did. And you say, man, I need Jesus for real. Come on down. We've got counselors down here, over here. Anybody that's wearing one of these green badges is going to be available to pray with you, to talk with you. I've asked Josh to just go ahead and play for a while. We're just going to keep this open for a little bit. We've got these prayer benches down here. People like to come down all the time and just throw themselves down and pray. So I'll be down here as well. We're just going to let Josh play some music here for a little while. And somebody, if you want to come on down, you're a little scared, grab somebody next to you. They'll come with you. Just put your hand around somebody and pray with them. Love seeing how God works on people through all kinds of situations. This life is temporary. Nick ended by talking about getting to see his son again one day and what that might look like. I want to remind us why we have hope. So as we end, instead of me just praying and saying you're dismissed, we're going to end on singing about the hope we have because Jesus' death arrested death for all of us.
my sorrow and dead in my sin. Lost without hope, no place to begin. Your love made a way to let mercy come in. 'Cause when death was arrested, my life began. When ash was redeemed, only beauty remained. And my orphan heart was given a name. My mourning grew quiet, my feet rose to dance. 'Cause when death was arrested, my life began. And oh, your grace so free washes over me. You have made us new now, life begins with you. Released from my chains, I'm a prisoner no more. My shame was a ransom faithfully bought. He canceled my debt and he called me his friend. 'Cause when death was arrested, my life began. Oh, your grace so free washes over me. You have made us new now, life begins with you. It's your endless love pouring down on us. You have made us new now, life begins with you. Our Savior displayed on the criminal's cross. Darkness rejoices, though heaven had lost. But then Jesus arose with our freedom in hand. 'Cause that's when death was arrested, my life began. 'Cause that's when death was arrested, my life began. Oh, your grace so free washes over me. You have made us new now, life begins with you. And it's your endless love pouring down on us. You have made us new now, life begins with you. Know your grace so free washes over me. Yet you have made us new now, life begins with you. It's your endless love pouring down on us. You have made us new now, life begins with you. Sing it out, we are free. So we're free,
we're free forever, amen. When death was arrested, my life began. Oh, we're free, forever we're free. Come join in the song of all the redeemed. Yes, we're free, forever, amen. When death was arrested, my life began.
God bless y'all. Thank y'all for coming. And Sunday school starts at 9:30 tomorrow. Service is 10:30. Y'all have a good evening.